And welcome back to the Old Gatbox Podcast. It's time now for the Big Red Elephant preview of Alabama at Wisconsin. Another one of those SEC versus Big Ten matchups. Of course, last week it was Texas in the Big House dominating Michigan. And I got a feeling it's going to be the same scenario this Saturday at Camp Randall Stadium in Madison, Wisconsin. If you've never been there, by the way, to Camp Randall, it really is a neat atmosphere. Madison is a college town. It's fun. It really is kind of a big campus personified. The stadium is not as big as some SEC stadiums, but the students do get into it. You're close to the field. It's a lot of fun. And I've heard people say, gosh, the atmosphere, it's a home field advantage. Listen, Alabama that's no longer even a factor. Alabama plays in big games all the time, obviously at home and always on the road. And so that will not be a factor in the least. The last time Alabama met Wisconsin, 2015, that was the season opener in Arlington, Texas, if you remember that. And Derrick Henry, who had played some really good games the season before, just dominated that performance. Alabama won 35-17, and Derrick carried it 13 times, 147 yards, 3 touchdowns, and that laid the groundwork for ultimately the Heisman Trophy for Derrick Henry, the great one. Alabama dominated that game. I think it's going to be a similar deal this Saturday. Of course, the only other meeting between Alabama and Wisconsin, the 1928 Rose Bowl. And that's when Alabama was laying the groundwork for being one of the greatest programs in college football history, Wallace Wade and company in that game. And again, I harken back to the Heisman Trophy. Mark Ingram, the very first Heisman Trophy winner at Alabama under Coach Saban. He's on the pregame show now for Fox. That'll be the first of 3 games on Fox, 11:05 local kickoff. I like getting up early. I like watching a little bit of game day. I like watching Mark Ingram, a guy who looks like he'd still play in the National Football League. And we're trying to get Mark, by the way, on the Old Gatbox Podcast. And if it works out, he told me, listen, he's super busy, especially leading up to game day, but hopefully that's going to happen at some point this week. Alabama, by the way, a 15.5-point favorite in this game. You know, back in late July, early August, it was 9.5, and that gradually has grown that number now 15.5. And I've talked to some people who are telling me, gosh, that's a lot of points, but not really when you compare the two rosters. And not to disparage Wisconsin in any way. Listen, they are a solid football team. They have some nice players on both sides of the football. Tyler Van Dyke is their quarterback, a transfer from Miami. And again, listen, he's a good quarterback, not a great quarterback, doesn't take a lot of shots down the field, is not a great runner as compared to Byron Brown, the outstanding quarterback at South Florida a week ago. Again, he caused problems for Alabama, not only because of the design run plays, but ad-libbing and taking off. Big guy, hard to tackle. Some people think this will be the last year for Byron Brown at South Florida. They think he'll get in the transfer portal. If he stays at USF, that'll be a good thing for the Bulls going forward. He's great. Tyler Van Dyke is not a great quarterback. He has 1 passing touchdown in 2 games this season. And again, Wisconsin has beaten Western Michigan and South Dakota. South Dakota is a really good FCS program, and they moved the ball up and down, ran the ball against Wisconsin. Again, 2 kind of cumbersome, get the job done type wins for Wisconsin. Obviously, they're trying to save their best for Alabama. Will Pauling is their wide receiver, the only wide receiver in 2 games who has more than 100 yards receiving. And Chez Malusi is their tailback. Good running back, by the way, 134 yards in the first 2 games. So those are the 2 guys who carry most of the weight for Wisconsin in this game. But the bottom line is, and I've had a chance to watch both of the Wisconsin games. Yeah, I mean, nowadays you can watch any game you want. And listen, Wisconsin, I just don't think they match up size-wise and speed-wise with Alabama. And I know a lot of people are down on Alabama after the game at South Florida. But again, I think what you have to really look at is the final 20 minutes of that game against South Florida. Leading up to the end of the third quarter, it was not pretty. 13 penalties, 120 yards, many of those holding penalties on the offensive line. But the final 20 minutes, they shifted some things around on the offensive line, and Alabama was ultra impressive those final 20 minutes. I mean, they dominated South Florida, and I expect them to do the same against Wisconsin. Along the offensive line, Elijah Pritchard, who came in late in that game, he'll be back and is healthy. And Caden Proctor, the big guy on the left side, is expected to be back. Didn't play at all last week, didn't even dress. So I think those two guys back on the starting five in the offensive line will solidify things for Alabama as they try to smooth things out and play a clean game. Again, that South Florida game, South Florida was only 3 of 18 on third down, but they were given a lot of third down reprieves because of penalties. So Alabama needs to clean that up, and I think they will. I just don't believe that Wisconsin, I mean, if you stack up every category, offensive line, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, defensive line, linebacker, secondary, even special teams, Wisconsin doesn't get a check in any of those categories. And again, I'm not saying anything negative about Wisconsin. It's just reality. And I do believe Alabama will cover this 15.5-point spread. Jalen Milroe, I think, will have more time to throw thanks to the offensive line getting some of the guys back. I think Alabama will be able to run the football. We saw at the end of the South Florida game. I think we'll see more of that against Wisconsin. And again, don't get nervous if Wisconsin moves the ball early on because they've saved up everything for this game. They showed absolutely nothing in those first two games. So it may take maybe a quarter and a half for Alabama's defense to kind of get settled in and figure out what Wisconsin is going to do. I just don't think Wisconsin can run the football in Alabama. I don't think they can stop Alabama's run. And if Alabama can avoid turnovers and the penalties, but win the giveaway, takeaway, be on that plus side, I think they'll dominate this game, and I think Alabama is going to go to 2-1 against the spread. Covered the first week, didn't cover last week, even though they came on strong in the fourth quarter. I think they'll be 2-1 against the spread heading into the off week, and then getting ready for, you know what? The Georgia Bulldogs come to T-Town in a couple of weeks. That's the Big Red Elephant preview of Alabama at Wisconsin. Can't wait for the pregame show. Again, looking forward to having Mark Ingram on the Old Gap Box podcast this week. And look forward to another exciting game. Again, SEC will dominate Big Ten in this matchup, just like Texas did Michigan. I think Alabama will cover against Wisconsin. Roll Tide, everybody.